Servius Tullius was the legendary sixth king of Rome, and the second of its Etruscan dynasty. He reigned from 578 to 535 BC. Roman and Greek sources describe his servile origins and later marriage to a daughter of Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, Rome's first Etruscan king, who was assassinated in 579 BC. The constitutional basis for his accession is unclear. He is variously described as the first Roman king to accede without election by the Senate, having gained the throne by popular and royal support, and as the first to be elected by the Senate alone, with support of the reigning queen but without recourse to a popular vote. Several traditions describe Servius' father as divine. Livy depicts Servius' mother as a captured Latin princess enslaved by the Romans. Her child is chosen as Rome's future king after a ring of fire is seen around his head. The Emperor Claudius discounted such origins and described him as an originally Etruscan mercenary, named Mastarna, who fought for Caelius Vibina. Servius was a popular king, and one of Rome's most significant benefactors. He had military successes against Veii and the Etruscans, and expanded the city to include the Quirinal, Viminal and Esquiline hills. He is traditionally credited with the institution of the Compitalia festivals, the building of temples to Fortuna and Diana and, less plausibly, the invention of Rome's first true coinage. Despite the opposition of Rome's patricians, he expanded the Roman franchise and improved the lot and fortune of Rome's lowest classes of citizens and non-citizens. According to Livy, he reigned for 44 years, until murdered by his daughter Tullia and son-in-law Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. In consequence of this tragic crime and his hubristic arrogance as king, Tarquinius was eventually removed. This cleared the way for the abolition of Rome's monarchy and the founding of the Roman Republic, whose groundwork had already been laid by Servius' reforms. Before its establishment as a republic, Rome was ruled by kings, Latin regus, singular rex. In Roman tradition, Rome's founder Romulus was the first. Servius Tullius was the sixth, and his successor Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was the last. The nature of Roman kingship is unclear. Most Roman kings were elected by the Senate, as to a lifetime magistracy, but some claimed succession through dynastic or divine right. Some were native Romans, others were foreign. Later Romans had a complex ideological relationship with this distant past. In republican mores and institutions, kingship was abhorrent, and remained so, in name at least, during the empire. On the one hand, Romulus was held to have brought Rome into being more or less at a stroke, so complete and purely Roman in its essentials that any acceptable change or reform thereafter must be clothed as restoration. On the other, Romans of the Republic and Empire saw each king as contributing in some distinctive and novel way to the city's fabric and territories, or its social, military, religious, legal, or political institutions. Servius Tullius has been described as Rome's second founder, the most complex and enigmatic of all its kings, and a kind of proto-republican magistrate. The oldest surviving source for the overall political developments of the Roman kingdom and republic is Cicero's De Republica, on the state, written in 44 BC. The main literary sources for Servius' life and achievements are the Roman historian Livy, 59 BC to AD 17, whose Ab Urbi Condita was generally accepted by the Romans as the standard, most authoritative account, Livy's near contemporary Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and Plutarch, c. 46 to 120 AD. Their own sources included works by Quintus Fabius Pictor, Diocles of Peparethus, Quintus Ennius, and Cato the Elder. Livy's sources probably included at least some official state records. He excluded what seemed implausible or contradictory traditions, and arranged his material within an overarching chronology. Dionysius and Plutarch offer various alternatives not found in Livy, and Livy's own pupil, the Etruscologist, historian, and Emperor Claudius, offered yet another, based on Etruscan tradition. Most Roman sources name Servius' mother as Acritia, a young noblewoman taken at the Roman siege of Corniculum and brought to Rome, either pregnant by her husband, who was killed at the siege, or as a virgin. She was given to Tanaquil, wife of King Tarquinius, and though slave, was treated with the respect due her former status. In one variant, she became wife to a noble client of Tarquinius. In others, she served the domestic rites of the royal hearth as a Vestal Virgin, and on one such occasion, having damped the hearth flames with a sacrificial offering, she was penetrated and impregnated by a disembodied phallus that rose from the hearth. According to Tanaquil, this was a divine manifestation, either of the household Lar or Vulcan himself. Thus Servius was divinely fathered and already destined for greatness, despite his mother's servile status. For the time being, Tanaquil and Acritia kept this a secret. Servius' birth to a slave of the royal household would have made him a member of Tarquin's extended domestic familia, and a slave himself. Livy describes Servius as a youth already holding an honorable position, as son of a living, noble mother and noble father. He is singled out for special favor when members of the royal household witness a nimbus of fire about his head while he sleeps, a sign of divine favor, and a great portent. In Livy's version, Servius becomes a protege of the royal family like a son through this event, and later marries their daughter Tarquinia. For Livy, this marriage undermines the traditional narrative in which Acritia, and thus her son Servius, are household slaves. Livy asserts that no slave, nor any of slave descent, could have been granted the great honor of marriage into Rome's ruling family. Servius proves a loyal, responsible son-in-law. When given governmental and military responsibilities, he excels in both. Plutarch, citing Valerius Antius and his school, names Servius' wife as Gaigania. The nimbus of fire appears around the sleeping Servius much later, when Gaigania is dying, a token of his birth from fire. Claims of divine ancestry and divine favor were often attached to charismatic individuals who rose as if from nowhere to become dynasts, tyrants, and hero founders in the ancient Mediterranean world. Yet all these legends offer the father as divine, the mother, virgin or not, as princess of a ruling house, never as slave. The disembodied phallus and its impregnation of a virgin slave of royal birth are unique to Servius. Livy and Dionysius ignore or reject the tales of Servius' supernatural virgin birth, though his parents came from a conquered people, both are of noble stock. His ancestry is an accident of fate, and his character and virtues are entirely Roman. He acts on behalf of the Roman people, not for personal gain. These Roman virtues are likely to find favor with the gods, and win the rewards of good fortune. The details of Servius' servile birth, miraculous conception, and links with divine fortuna were doubtless embellished after his own time, but the core may have been propagated during his reign. His unconstitutional and seemingly reluctant accession, and his direct appeal to the Roman masses over the heads of the Senate may have been interpreted as signs of tyranny. Under these circumstances, an extraordinary personal charisma must have been central to his success. When Servius expanded Rome's influence and boundaries, and reorganized its citizenship and armies, his new Rome was still centered on the Comitium, the Casa Romuli or hut of Romulus. Servius became a second Romulus, a benefactor to his people, part human, part divine, but his slave origins remain without parallel, and make him all the more remarkable. For Cornell, this is the most important single fact about him. The story of his servile birth evidently circulated far beyond Rome. Mithridates VI of Pontus sneered that Rome had made kings of servos vernasque tuscorum, Etruscan slaves, and domestic servants. Claudius' story of Servius as an Etruscan named Max Darna, title for dictator in Etruscan, was published as an incidental scholarly comment within the Oratio Claudii Caesaris of the Lugdunum tablet. There is some support for this Etruscan version of Servius, in wall paintings at the François tomb in Etruscan Vulci. They were commissioned sometime in the second half of the 4th century BC. One panel shows heroic Etruscans putting foreign captives to the sword. The victims include an individual named Neve Tarchines Rumac, interpreted as a Roman named Gnaeus Tarquinius, although known Roman history records no Tarquinius of that praenomen. The victors include All and Cale Vipinas, known to the Romans as the Vibina brothers, and their ally Maxtrana, who seems instrumental in winning the day. Claudius was certain that Max Darna was simply another name for Servius Tullius, who started his career as an Etruscan ally of the Vibina brothers and helped them settle Rome's Caelian hill. Claudius' account evidently drew on sources unavailable to his fellow historians, or rejected by them. There may have been two different, Servius-like figures, or two different traditions about the same figure. Max Darna may have been the name of a once celebrated Etruscan hero, or more speculatively, an Etruscan rendering of Roman Magister. Claudius' Etruscan Servius seems less a monarch than a freelance Roman Magister, an archaic condottiere who placed himself and his own band of armed clients at Vibina's service, and may later have seized, rather than settled Rome's Caelian hill. If the Etruscan Max Darna was identical with the Roman Servius, the latter may have been less monarch than some kind of proto-republican magistrate given permanent office, perhaps a magister populi, a war leader, or in republican parlance, a dictator. Servius' political reforms and those of his successor Tarquinius Superbus undermined the bases of aristocratic power and transferred them in part to commoners. Rome's ordinary citizens became a distinct force within Roman politics, entitled to participate in government and bear arms on its behalf, despite the opposition and resentment of Rome's patricians and senate. Tarquinius was ousted by a conspiracy of patricians, not plebeians. Once in existence, the Comitia Centuriata could not be unmade, or its powers reduced as republican Rome's highest court of appeal. It had the capacity to overturn court decisions, and the Republican Senate was constitutionally obliged to seek its approval. In time, the Comitia Centuriata legitimized the rise to power of a plebeian nobility, and plebeian consuls. Servius' connections to the Lar and his reform of the Vici connect him directly to the founding of Comp Italia, instituted to publicly and piously honor his divine parentage, assuming the Lar as his father, to extend his domestic rights into the broader community, to mark his maternal identification with the lower ranks of Roman society and to assert his regal sponsorship and guardianship of their rights. Sometime before the Augustan Comp Italia reforms of 7 BC, Dionysius of Halicarnassus reports Servius fathering by a Lar and his founding of Comp Italia as ancient Roman traditions. In Servius, Augustus found ready association with a popular benefactor and refounder of Rome, whose reluctance to adopt kingship distanced him from its taints. Augustus brought the Comp Italia and its essentially plebeian festivals, customs, and political factions under his patronage and, if need be, his censorial powers. He did not, however, trace his lineage and his refounding to Servius, who even with part divine ancestry still had servile connections, but with Romulus, patrician founding hero, ancestor of the divine Julius Caesar, descendant of Venus and Mars. Plutarch admires the Servian reforms for their imposition of good order in government, the military and public morality, and Servius himself as the wisest, most fortunate, and best of all Rome's kings.